Jeffrey Dahmer brutally murdered 17 young men and boys.
Once it happened the first time, it just seemed like it had control of my life from there on in.
His killing spree lasted more than a decade, and the horror didn't stop at murder. Was there something sexual in the dismemberment of the bodies for you?
Yes, there was a sexual part to that.
Why the cannibalism? How could a seemingly normal Midwestern boy grow up to commit such terrible crimes? Dahmer's parents struggled to find the answers.
It's been eternal torment.
Do you feel that you're being blamed?
Yes, I do.
Dahmer agreed to speak with us at the behest of his father, who had just written a revealing book. Is there anything in this book that you strongly disagree with?
Yes.
On the surface, the interview with Lionel Dahmer was matter of fact. Where you were holding back your emotions.
Yeah.
But beneath his composure, unbearable pain.
But they don't realize that I have very deep feelings inside.
The interview with Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, Joyce, was often contentious.
I don't mean to argue with you. I have no business doing that. I'm really scared.
I interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer and his parents at length in 1994. Much of what they shared has never been heard until now. MSNBC brings you the never-before-seen Confessions of a Serial Killer. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stone Phillips. In February 1994, at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, I sat down with serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer for his first, and as it turned out, his last network television interview. His father, Lionel Dahmer, had just written a book about his son, and he joined us. Jeff, as his father called him, was polite and seemed unnervingly normal. Rarely had a serial killer spoken in such detail about his crimes or the possible root causes. But this father and son spoke about both, as did Dahmer's mother in a rare interview. As you'll see, even looking back more than a decade later, there are still no easy answers.
How are you, Dad? Hi, Jeff. Sherry, how are you? Yeah. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Hi, Jeff. Mr. Phillips.
Hi, Mr. Phillips. How are you?
Nice to see you. You've been spending the last few days with your folks.
Great.
Talking about a lot of different things.
Hey, you're lucky it came up on a day when there's no snow. It was snowing like crazy all weekend.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How are things going here for you?
Slow and steady. Nothing out of the ordinary, really.
You've read the book?
Yes. Yes, I read the book. My dad sent it to me about last week, and spent all night reading it. I was up all night reading it. It was quite a surprise to me, some parts of it. Very interesting.
In what sense?
Just some of the things that were revealed caught me off guard, and just some very big surprises in it for me.
What was it that caught you off guard?
Some of his insights into what he thought of me as I was growing up.
All set? Everybody ready? Okay, let's all take a deep breath. Your dad comes here to visit about once a month, but I get the impression that the two of you don't talk a lot about everything that happened, about the crimes in particular.
No, we don't discuss that because it's been gone over so thoroughly in the papers and the media that there's just really no point in going into any in-depth talks about it. We talk about our family, home, how things used to be, what prison life is like here now, and try to keep things as light and upbeat as possible.
Is it hard for you to go back and talk about those things?
No, not the good things. In fact, it gives me a sense of comfort to talk about the few good times there were in the past.
You say the few good times. Do you think of your childhood as having been profoundly unhappy?
No, not profoundly. My childhood wasn't filled with any great tragedies or anything. There were good times and there were bad times. I think it was fairly normal.
Jeff, do you remember your earliest experience and earliest interest, fascination with the inside of animals? Where that came from?
In 9th grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs. I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it. And I just started branching out. Dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy, but it didn't. It veered off into this. Why, I don't know. All I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like.
Was there some pleasure in the cutting open of the animal?
Yes, there was. No sexual pleasure, but just it's hard to describe.
Sense of power, sense of control?
I suppose that's a good way of putting it, yeah.
I can sort of see a fascination for, wanting to see or for looking at the insides of animals, say for the first time. After you did it one time, what more is to be gained by looking at another dog's inside, the second or the third?
I don't know. It became a compulsion, and it switched from animals to humans. I still don't understand it. I don't know why.
What would you do with the dead animals, Jeff? You would pick the carcasses up from the road and take them back into the woods.
Take them back in the woods, skin them sometimes, slit them all the way open, look at the organs, feel them. There was a sort of general excitement for me. I don't know why. It was exciting to see.
One of your dad's biggest questions is when you began to slip away, when you crossed over into this world of obsession or dark fantasy from which you just couldn't return. Can you pinpoint that? Is there a sense for when that really began to happen with you, Jeff?
I think it was around age 14 or 15. Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't. I just kept it all inside.
Do you have any sense for where that was coming from?
No. No, I've talked with a few psychologists about it. They have their theories, but they don't have any concrete answers either.
Do you have a theory?
No, not really. I don't know where it came from. I probably will never know. But I never dreamed that it would become a reality.
Coming up, more pointed questions for a serial killer. Why the cannibalism? Jeffrey Dahmer was finally caught in 1991 after one of his would-be victims escaped and alerted police. What was discovered in Dahmer's apartment was horrifying. Body parts in a barrel, a human head in a refrigerator. When he confessed, the gruesome details were almost impossible to comprehend. What was it, Jeff, that took you over the edge, do you think, and made you take this from the world of fantasy into reality?
From 15 on, I had this reoccurring fantasy of meeting a hitchhiker on the road and of taking him hostage and doing what I wanted with him. About 3 years later, I was 18 years old, driving home. I saw this hitchhiker about a mile from my house. Thought to myself, should I stop and pick him up, or should I just keep on going? I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. I turned around, picked him up, And that's when the nightmare became a reality. It just seemed so bizarre to me that this obsession that I had been thinking about and wanting, just all the parts are there, and they make it possible to make it happen.
What happened after you took him to the house?
The house was empty. My mother was up in Chippewa Falls with her family, and my dad was living in a rented motel about 5 miles away due to the divorce. And I pretty much had the place to myself. I was drinking a lot during that time, and just, I don't know, looking for something to, some way to find some fulfillment, some pleasure. And I acted on my fantasies, and that's where everything went wrong.
This was the summer of 1978 when you took your first victim.
Right. Once it happened the first time, it just seemed like it had control of my life from there on in. The second occurrence was 1984, roughly. And I met this guy at one of the bars, downtown Milwaukee bars. We went back to the hotel, just planning on getting drunk. I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him unconscious, and was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed, and I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have. And that's when it all started again.
And once it started again, you found it impossible to stop.
Right, that's when the obsession went into full swing.
Did you ever tell yourself, I have to stop this? I must stop doing this?
Yes.
When it was going on?
After the second time, it seemed like the compulsion to do it was too strong, and I didn't even try to stop it after that. But before the second time, things had been building up gradually, going to bookstores, going to the bars, the gay bars, bath clubs. When that wasn't enough, buying sleeping pills and using it on various guys in the bath clubs. It just escalated slowly but surely. And after the second time, which was not planned, it was out of control. It felt like it was out of control.
Where did sex enter in to the killings, Jeff?
It was a big part of it. My only objective was to find the best-looking guy that I could. Their sexual preference didn't matter to me.
Did their race matter to you?
No, their race didn't matter to me. The first two young men were white. The third young man was American Indian. The fourth and fifth were Hispanic. So no, race had nothing to do with it. It was just their looks.
Was there something sexual in the dismemberment of the bodies for you?
As time went on, yes, I did get there was a sexual part to that. I started saving the skeletons and preserving other parts, and one thing led to another. It took more and more deviant type behaviors to satisfy my urges, and so it just spiraled out of control.
Why the cannibalism?
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
Was it the killing that excited you, or is it what happened after the killing?
No, the killing was just a means to an end. That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. That's why I tried to create living zombies with uric acid in the drill, but it never worked. No, the killing wasn't the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted. It's not easy to say that, but that's what the motive was.
Where did that need for control come from? Do you have any idea?
I don't know, maybe I felt I had no control as a child or young adult, and that got mixed in with my sexuality, and I ended up doing what I did was my way of feeling in complete control, at least for that situation, creating my own little world where I had the final say, finding the best looking guy that I could, and having total mastery over him for as long as I wanted. Lust played a big part of it, controlling lust. That was the motive right there.
A lot of this came out in the course of the trial. Obviously, both of you sat through this. Have the two of you sat down and talked about these things before?
No, not in depth.
This is the first time you're talking about these things with
I've talked
your dad
about it
here.
at great length with psychiatrists, court-appointed psychiatrists, psychologists, but not with my family.
We learned everything at the trial and in the confessions and that sort of thing after the fact.
The two of you never really communicated all that much, did you, father and son?
Not on any deep level, no. We talked about superficial things. Never really had a real deep heart-to-heart talk about what was going on inside our own minds. I was always a very private person. I didn't like to open up and share anything with anyone. I like to keep my thoughts to myself.
Why do you think that was?
Because from about 15 years on up, a great deal of my thoughts were basically unshareable with anyone. So I just closed myself off and put on a mask of normalcy.
Coming up, were you surprised to read that about your dad?
Very surprised. I suppose everyone has their secret thoughts.
When I interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer in 1994, his father Lionel had just written a book as part of his own painful journey to try and understand how his son became a serial killer. Despite regular visits to the prison, father and son had never spoken about many of the topics covered in the book until our interview. You've read the book.
Right.
He called it a father's story. Pretty simple title.
Right.
Not a simple story, though.
No, not a simple story. Not one that was easy for me to read. But I'm glad he wrote it.
Did it hurt? Was it painful to read?
Yes, it was painful. Some parts of it were, for me, were even fun to read. There were good parts. It wasn't all negative.
Was it emotional for you reading the book?
Yes, it was.
Tell me, what kind of feelings did you have reading it?
Deep regret, sorrow. I guess those were the two main emotions.
Is there anything in this book that you strongly disagree with?
Yes, I disagree with the description of me as being so incredibly shy and introverted, because maybe that's the way my dad saw me, because there was so much tension in the home that I really didn't feel like being up and happy a lot of the times. But with my friends in school, I had a good time. We had good, good social life, and so I wasn't so extremely reclusive and self-centered as it portrays me.
Does it surprise you to hear Jeff say that he doesn't think of himself and never did as innately shy?
It did surprise me. Maybe my perception was accentuated to the extreme.
But you do recall at age 6 that you became more aware of tensions in the home.
Oh yeah, that's the time I really remember noticing that things weren't quite right.
So it wasn't so much innate shyness as it was wanting to withdraw from tension and arguments and problems in the house.
That's how I saw it, yeah. I sort of lived in my own little fantasy world when things got too heated in the household. And I carried that over for years, I guess.
And was there violence in that fantasy world?
No, not
early on?
Not that, not the type that showed itself later. No, it was just my own little world where I had control.
Was anger a part of it for you, Jeff?
I had some anger. Probably every kid has some anger, about their childhood. It really wasn't a terrible childhood, though. There were a lot of good times. It wasn't a really terrible time.
So pat theories about you as a serial killer striking out to get back at your dad, for instance, don't ring true to you.
No, that has no truth in it. The only motive that there ever was to completely control a person that I found physically attractive, and keep them with me as long as possible, even if it meant just keeping a part of them.
Did you know before you read this book that your dad had his own obsessions and fantasies, that he had thought about, that he had dreamed of committing murder, that he had had an obsession with fire and with explosives?
No, I don't think that's the type of thing one asks one's dad.
Were you surprised to read that about your dad?
Very surprised. Yeah. I didn't know what to think about it. I suppose everyone has their secret thoughts, and so it was somewhat of a shock.
You feel grateful that your father wrote this book? Or do you feel put off by it? I'm just curious about your overall reaction to it. Do you feel is the book an invasion, do you think? Or is it...
No, I feel nothing but pride for him for writing the book, and having the courage to bare his soul when he didn't have to. He didn't have to get involved with trying to, help me out and support me and be an emotional support for me, and I'll be grateful to him forever for it.
Coming up, a serial killer's take on the meaning of life.
I always believe the lie that evolution is truth. The whole theory cheapens life.
Jeffrey Dahmer kept many secrets, even before he killed his first victim. While it's not unusual for teenagers to keep some things from their parents, Dahmer's father was tormented by the idea that perhaps he had missed a key sign of what was to come and the chance to stop him. But Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't sure he would have revealed anything, and was angered by the way some people had blamed his parents. Did you ever consider talking to your parents, to your dad, about homosexuality? Is that something that you felt you could ever raise?
Early on, I really didn't know that much about it myself. All I knew was that it was something that was to be kept hush-hush, not talked about, not even thought about. So I just kept it all within me and never talked about sexual issues at all, really, with anybody.
Do you think if you had been able to talk about that in a more open way with your dad, for instance, that it would have helped, might have broken this veil of secrecy and enabled you to keep yourself from going down that road?
I don't know exactly what, if anything, would have ever kept me from going down that road. Talking about it, I don't think would have made that much difference, because, like I said, there were things going on in my head that I would have never opened up and talked about with anybody.
Your dad says he never realized how deeply troubled you were because he just thought you were shy the way he had been, shy as a boy. Do you think the signs were there and he just missed them?
No, I don't think so, because I had thoughts, I had fantasies, but there was no outward show of anything that was wrong.
You were pretty good at keeping it all inside.
Right, I kept it inside, didn't share any of my thoughts or emotions with anybody.
So how would I ever know?
No, you never saw any of it, as far as I know.
I did not really hear from anyone about any of these activities. And that's what really strikes me now, is if I would have known, what would I have done about it? I think I would have done a lot about it.
I feel it's wrong for people who commit crimes to try to shift the blame onto somebody else, onto their parents or onto their upbringing or living circumstances. I think that's just a cop-out. And my parents, my relatives, had no knowledge of what I was doing. They're absolutely not responsible for any of it in any way. And I take full responsibility.
But you understand that what you did would lead your father to ask himself all kinds of questions.
That's true.
Where did I go wrong? Was there something I could have said or done to have prevented this?
Right.
Did I, in some way, create or contribute to the terrible acts my son committed?
I understand that. I just get angry with other people who think that they have a right to somehow try to blame my parents for what happened. That's not right at all. No one has the right to do that because they're totally innocent. They had no knowledge of it. And that angers me.
But parents just naturally, I mean, any parent that really cares, they just first of all say, gee, I feel guilty. You know, there's just feelings of guilt. What happened? What did I do? What could I have done? And so that's a normal parental reaction.
Your dad has wondered about all kinds of things, from the medication that your mom was on during her pregnancy, to the fact that you were exposed to violent arguments in the home from an early age and continuing, to the possibility that he might have passed on some genetic propensity for obsession or violent behavior. Does any of that ring true to you?
I can see why he'd wonder about those things, but as far as I'm concerned, they're all excuses, because I didn't feel accountable to anybody. I didn't feel that I had to face what I had done ever, and so there comes a point where a person has to be accountable for what he's done. Can't go around making excuses, blaming other people or other things. So I alone am the one who's responsible for what's happened.
Let me ask, when did you first feel that everyone is accountable for their actions?
Well, thanks to you for sending that creation science material, because I always believe the lie that evolution is truth, the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from the slime, and when we died, you know, that was it. There was nothing. So the whole theory cheapens life, and started reading books about that show how evolution is just a complete lie. There's no basis in science to uphold it, and I've since come to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is the true creator of the heavens and the earth. It just didn't just happen. And I've accepted him as my Lord and Savior, and I believe that I, as well as everyone else, will be accountable to him.
Growing up, did you feel that you were accountable to your dad? or to your mom as the authority
Yes, I
figure
did.
in the house?
Yes, I did. I mean, they didn't let me run wild. They disciplined me, and so I felt accountable to them. But afterwards, after I left the home, that's when I started wanting to sort of create my own little world where I could be the one who had the complete control, where I didn't have to bow to anyone else's demands, and I just took it way too far.
Lionel?
At that period of time, I had drifted away from a belief in a supreme being. And I never, as a result, passed along the feeling that we are all accountable in the end. He owns us. And that basic concept is very fundamental to all of us.
You feel that the absence, at least for a while, of a strong religious faith and
Yes,
belief
for some years.
may have prevented you from instilling some of that in Jeff.
That's right.
Is that how you feel?
Yes, I think I had a big part to do with it. I mean, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. And I've since come to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is truly God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're the only true God.
Coming up, a mother's pain.
It's almost like I don't have a right to mourn or grieve because there are all these families who will never speak to their children again.
In 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's mother lived 2,000 miles away from her son, in a different state with a different last name. But Joyce Flint still felt deeply connected to her eldest child and was grieving for her own loss. We all think about victims' parents in a case like Jeffrey's, but we don't often think about the parents whose child committed crimes like this. What's it been like for you?
Well, it's been horrendous. I don't know if I have words to explain something that was never seen or forecast or expected. I learned about Jeff in the same way everyone else did. A friend called me and told me it had been on television in another state. And so half an hour later I turned the television on and saw his picture. And at that point, what do? You can't believe what's happening. And you cry and you grab a friend. And that's what I did. What was most unusual about it was that I didn't know, I hadn't been in contact with Jeff, although I tried, and yet no one had ever let me know that Jeff had been in any kind of trouble at all during the years.
When did the full impact of all of this hit you?
I don't know if it has yet. I don't know if it ever will. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be able to. How does anyone? The full impact. It's the rest of our lives. I have another son, a younger son, for the rest of his life. He will have to find a way to be strong and deal with this.
Has this followed him?
Yes, it has. But he's doing very well. He's finished an graduate degree and is working and very successful and visits his brother. It's a very difficult thing to say. A stone, one of the hardest things for me to say is how much I can't believe this happened, and how much I love Jeff, when I'm very much aware that it's almost like I don't have a right to mourn or grieve, because there are all these families who will never, ever speak to their children again. It's a very strange set of circumstances. I still have my son Jeff now to talk to, and we've established a wonderful relationship, and I hope I don't hurt all of the people who've lost their children by saying that.
What was he like as a young boy before school?
Wonderful. I thought he was wonderful. He was fun. We did all of the normal things that people do. It's hard to be asked questions that go back 30-some years when you never expected that anything but good would happen in your family.
Were there ever any early signs of trouble with Jeff?
If there had,
looking back on it today, were there?
no. What would you look for? If I'd seen something that had been a clue of any kind, I'd like to think that I would have done something about it immediately. No, there wasn't anything unusual about Jeff. He was a normal young boy.
Jeff's first grade teacher referred to him as inordinately shy and profoundly unhappy.
He didn't seem inordinately shy to me. He seemed, he didn't like school. He had a very difficult year that year, first grade, moving from where he'd lived. I was pregnant with his baby brother, so...
Did he seem profoundly unhappy?
No. Well, no. When you say profoundly unhappy, there wasn't any clue that there was anything other than this was a little, rather shy child who had to go to school and mingle and be sociable, and that wasn't his thing.
Coming up, more with Jeffrey Dahmer's mother.
Telling you the truth the very best I can, there wasn't anything unusual.
But first, his father looks deep within to see if he is somehow responsible for his son's crimes.
The question is, why does a father murder in his dreams and a son murder in real life?
Real life.
How would you describe Jeff as a young child? Was he happy? Was he outgoing as a 2, 3, 4-year-old?
He was quite outgoing up until maybe age 3, 3.5, 4, somewhere in there. He developed a double hernia.
That was pretty traumatic for him physically, wasn't it?
I think, you know, if this whole thing is conjecture at this point. It might have been, along with other incidents in his life, might have been one of the trigger points. I mean, you know, the old Freudian castration complex might come to bear here, and I guess psychoanalysts would really have a heyday with this, because, you know, he was concerned about losing his penis. He asked his mother if he had lost it, if it had been cut off. Now,
which is something he later did to his, or at least some of his victims.
That's true, yes.
One thing that many serial killers have in common is a history of sexual abuse. Was Jeff sexually abused at any time?
No, never.
Was not abused by anyone in the home?
No.
Sexually?
No.
Can you even begin to describe what it's been like for you as the parent of someone who has committed crimes of this nature?
Well, it's been eternal torment. In the privacy of my own room, people generally look at me as sort of not emotional, and I come off as maybe a little bit remote because of that.
Well, you were holding back your emotions just now.
But they don't realize that I have very deep feelings inside.
An armchair psychologist would argue that the fact that you are so unemotional about all of this only signifies the fact that inside there may be very powerful emotions. That the person who keeps things so tightly under control is the person who is really afraid of losing control of some very powerful feelings inside. True in your case?
That's probably true, yeah. I would say that's a fair statement.
Today, when you think about the obsessions that were consuming Jeff as a teenager, they aren't altogether unfamiliar, are they?
I think inferiority goes, lack of control or feeling of no control over your environment or kids around you. I think inferiority sort of goes along with shyness. Jeff was shy, I was shy. Then comes the thought of control. You just don't have the control of your environment. And my early infatuation or obsession was with fire. Just about burned down my neighbor's garage one time. Just starting a little fire.
When you were a teenager, you had dreams of committing murder yourself.
Yeah, let me clarify that.
Please.
I was shy and, felt lack of control and so forth, and I was bullied. Okay, there were a lot of bullies in our neighborhood. And almost always after I was either physically or in some other way harassed by bullies, I would wake up, say, the next morning or the morning after that, shortly after that, and I would for just say about 30 seconds or so, have this feeling that I had hurt someone, that I had maybe hurt them badly, that I had killed them. But it was a vague sort of a feeling, and it happened just every so often, and after attacks by neighborhood kids.
The question is, why does a father murder in his dreams and a son murder in real life?
Real life.
Yeah. In mentioning these things and writing about them in your book, you seem to believe that you may have passed on some kind of genetic propensity for obsession or destructive behavior. That might be one factor in this puzzle of why your son did what he did.
It's something to be considered, in the broad spectrum of possibilities. The problem with just calling it genetic predisposition or genetic predestinarianism is that it's not really scientific. It's not true with respect to personality. But it's being investigated.
What led him to cross the line, to go over the edge?
I don't know, but I guess I would just conjecture that whatever it was, it probably goes back further to whatever got hooked into his sexuality. I do believe strongly that those hormones are the most powerful thing on earth almost, and I do believe that theory.
A sexual drive. It was the sexual drive that led him to murder and dismember.
That's my personal belief, and however it got bizarrely hooked into entrails, is beyond me, but I believe that if it could be unearthed as to how that happened, or what that derivation was, then we'd have the answer.
Coming up, the Dahmer's volatile marriage and its effects examined.
It was unnerving, depressing, made me angry sometimes.
It was his first and last network television interview. Serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer talking about his horrific crimes and trying to figure out for himself why he had such a compulsion to kill. Much had been made of the home environment in which he grew up and the marital strife to which he was exposed throughout his childhood. Could he have been so affected it would later drive him to commit unspeakable crimes? Dahmer had strong feelings about that. What do you remember about your parents arguing when you were growing up, and what effect that had on you?
It was unnerving, depressing, made me angry sometimes. I'd leave the house, go out in the woods and sulk, brooding, wondering why they had to have such a rough relationship. Most of the time they didn't seem to get along too well together. I never knew what the real underlying problems were. I didn't feel it was my place to ask.
Did you blame one or the other? Mom and Dad?
No, I didn't. I was just frustrated that things couldn't be happier around the house.
You just wanted things to be more peaceful.
Right. I never saw any real violent arguments as far as physical hitting or anything like that, but there was a lot of yelling, a lot of tension in the house sometimes.
All set? Everybody ready? Let's go.
At the time of the interview, Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, Joyce, was writing her own book, tentatively titled An Assault on Motherhood. She insisted that her co-author sit next to her for support. The book was never published, and the co-author never appeared in the original broadcast.
What kinds of things was Jeff exposed to? What kinds of things did he see and hear?
Nothing out of the ordinary. Well, what can I do? I can compare it with my own upbringing, and my mother and father fought, and it was kind of a normal thing, and they would get over it. And Lionel and I discovered very early on that we were very different people. I was more emotional and more outgoing than he was, and marriage became really a very unhappy place. And how much that affected the children at the time, I didn't think that it affected them in any really harmful way, because they were never physically abused.
There were very heated arguments. And on occasion that would lead to some physical...
Excuse me, Stone. If you want to stop a minute and think about whether you want to talk about that abuse on...
How am I going to know what's going to be on television and what's not going to be?
Well, I mean, I think you need to assume, while only a very small portion of this will be on, I mean, I want you to be comfortable with what you say, because...
Well, one of the things that I don't want to get involved in on this television show is trying to do the same thing to Lionel as he's done to me, and that is to somehow blame him. So
I'm not asking. I really don't want to get to whose fault. No, we're rolling. But I'm just saying, I don't want to get. I am really not concerned with fault and whether it was you or whether it was Lionel. What I'm trying to understand is what was going on between you for whatever reason. I'm sure both of you brought something to the table on that. That's usually the case in a marriage situation. My question is, what kinds of things, what do you recall about the kinds of things that were happening between you that Jeff may have been exposed to, and to the extent that there is some question about the kind of emotional turmoil that might have caused him?
Stone, I have to tell you, I've thought of that over and over again, and there's nothing about the kind of arguments, the kinds of fights we might have had, the disagreements over how to bring up children, there was nothing unusual about that. And Jeff is not the result of what is going on in every home in America. He's not the result of that.
So you're saying it wasn't a perfect marriage, you're saying, but it was nothing so extraordinary that it could explain why he went on to do what he did?
Absolutely not. Telling you the truth the very best I can, there wasn't anything unusual.
It was pretty intense, the arguments between the two of you.
Yeah, yes. A lot of the arguments were very intense, and I couldn't see any way but to just leave the room or leave the house, or just, there was no compromise.
How much of this violence in the home was Jeff exposed to?
There were times when he heard the shouting and her physical agitated motions. He observed them, and he went outside and just left the house. And I learned later, I didn't know at the time, I didn't hear him do this, but I learned later that he was slapping the trees with branches and sticks, and I guess apparently out of frustration. So apparently Jeff was very disturbed over the arguments. I have no doubt that he was very disturbed.
There are thousands, literally thousands of children who grow up exposed to these kinds of problems.
And worse.
And worse. And yet they don't go on to do the kinds of things that Jeff did.
In and of themselves, they're not I guess we would say, not the only factors. But, you know, everyone's an individual, I guess, aren't they? But there may have been more important, unknown to us yet, trigger points that make Jeff more unique than the usual case.
When you think back on those times, the arguments and the possible effect it may have had on the kids, does it cause you anguish?
It makes me sick that we didn't have a more Ozzie and Harriet type family. And I know there really are no Ozzie and Harriet families per se, but there are some that really are healthy, quite healthy. And ours could have been. And it just makes me sick to my stomach that it wasn't. That's how I feel. And I'll feel that way to my death.
Coming up, the agonizing search for pieces of the puzzle turns to Joyce's pregnancy with Jeffrey, a topic that would fuel an intense debate.
There's an obvious discrepancy here between what you're saying and what Lionel is saying about the nature of the pregnancy.
Are you serious?
By all outward appearances, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed like a normal boy growing up. So how did he become a serial killer? The search for the root causes went all the way back to his mother's pregnancy. Both of Dahmer's parents said it had not been an easy time, but during separate interviews with each of them, that was about all they agreed on.
At times, her legs would lock tightly in place, and her whole body would grow rigid and begin to tremble. During these strange seizures, her eyes would bulge like a frightened animal, and she would begin to salivate, literally frothing at the mouth. We'd have to call the doctor, who in those days they still made house calls, and he came immediately, and it always ended up that he gave her a shot of some type of relaxant.
What kind of drugs was she on?
There were a mixture of things. He would have to come and inject Seconal or morphine if, in some instances, when her body would not relax.
The doctor?
Yeah, the doctor.
Morphine, barbiturates?
Yeah, relaxants.
Phenobarbital?
Yes,
She was on a pretty heavy
yeah,
drug
she was
regimen.
on quite a heavy diet of prescription drugs, right.
What do you remember about the pregnancy?
I had what I thought were probably the ordinary kinds of things that happen when you're pregnant, and
Morning sickness,
morning sickness,
a lot of nausea.
yes.
Lionel describes a strange, undiagnosed problem. He describes it as some kind of a seizure that you developed, a proneness to seizures late in the pregnancy, where he describes it as a kind of rigidness for which you were prescribed medications. Do you remember that, and can you describe it?
I don't remember that at all. I can't imagine where that comes from. It isn't true. I don't.
You don't recall anything like that?
No.
Seizures or
No.
seizure-like episodes?
Absolutely not.
Were you prescribed medications, including morphine, barbiturates?
I don't know what medications were prescribed, and I'm surprised that anyone says that there is something that lists every single medication I took 33 years ago. I had a doctor, a physician. I took the medicine that was prescribed for me, and for the most part I was healthy.
You weren't on morphine?
I don't think you give pregnant women morphine. I'd have to ask my doctor, but they don't give pregnant women morphine.
Barbiturates of any kind in order to calm you down in these seizure states, as Lionel describes them?
There were no seizure states.
Where's it
I don't know where
coming
that's
from?
coming from. Well, Stone, I don't know. And it's one of the reasons why I'm finally speaking out, because there were no seizures. There was nothing that was out of the ordinary as far as my pregnancy was concerned, except that I needed to be in bed.
There's an obvious discrepancy here between what you're saying and what Lionel is saying about the nature of the pregnancy. It was difficult, you both agree, but he describes you in these states where you were, as he says, literally frothing at the mouth.
Are you serious?
In these rigid states, yeah, for which you were given medication to settle or calm you down.
Well, I don't know what his purpose is in doing that. I do know that when this first happened, the very first thing that the husband that I divorced did was come out with these accusations against me. They're not true. Well, I don't know how I can prove it to you that they're not true.
Is it possible you just don't remember them?
No, it's not possible. I don't remember them. It was my first pregnancy. I remember everything about my first pregnancy.
There's an important point you want to talk about that you really want to make, and is the reason why you've come on. So let's talk about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much, Stone, because I'm really feeling like the questions that I've been asked so far are exactly the reason why I wanted to come on, exactly the reason why I want to write a book tentatively titled An Assault on Motherhood, and that's exactly how I feel, like I'm being assaulted by statements that can't be substantiated, that people have said are not so, but here I am one more time having to defend myself. I want to get across that we as women just can't take this kind of thing anymore. If something bad happens to our son or our child, there has to be a place for us to go. I want a place for all the victims, to have a place where there's some compassion and understanding instead of a blaming.
Coming up, Joyce talks about the pain of feeling blamed for her son's crimes and disputes more of her ex-husband's recollections.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but I never heard anything like that ever happened.
In 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, Joyce Flint, was tormented, feeling unfairly blamed for her son's horrific crimes. She had planned to write a book, tentatively titled An Assault on Motherhood, about her ordeal. In fact, her co-author sat next to her during the interview, sometimes interrupting when she felt the questions were too much for Joyce to handle. The book was never published, but in our interview, Dahmer's mother talked candidly about her pain and about her anger.
Do you feel that you're being blamed?
Yes, I do.
Do you feel that Lionel's blaming you?
That certainly does seem to be what happened when he first came out on television.
And there are elements of Lionel's new book which do seem to say things about the pregnancy, about reluctance to breastfeed after the pregnancy, about Joyce's state during early motherhood, which seem to indicate something was wrong with the mothering. Now, this isn't the theme of the book, but it corresponds to the theme of so many questions from the media that have come along all along the way. And I'm not saying you're asking these now.
But at the same time, Lionel asks a lot of questions about himself, about what kind of father he was, about his own thoughts and maybe his own mistakes. I mean, one of the first places he looks is right in the mirror.
But if he wants to speak about himself, it's fine if he wants to make false or accurate accusations about his own behavior. But to state things about Joyce, which may or may not be true, and in some cases apparently are not true, in his book, is a certain type of blaming somebody who has not yet had the opportunity to speak up.
You've read his book?
Yes.
Joyce, you have not read it?
No, I haven't.
Joyce has not read it yet. Joyce has been not well, and reading that book, which just came out, hasn't been something she was ready for.
The excerpts that I have seen in the newspaper are so astounding to me. He told everyone that I was crazy, that I had abused my body with medicines, that I somehow was to blame. There's no doubt about that. Now he turns around and, for whatever his reasons are, I don't know what he's trying to accomplish with talking about something he should have shared with me before he ever married me. If he's got some thought that had anything to do with Jeff.
You mean his mental state, that you weren't informed?
Dreaming of murder,
yes, exactly.
obsession with explosives. He never talked to you about any of that?
None of that.
I think one of the points is it's all clear in retrospect. I mean, for instance, one of the anecdotes that he tells in the book, Joyce, is when Jeff was 4 years old and Lionel had crawled underneath the house to remove some dead animals, and he put some of the bones from the dead animals into a bucket. And Jeff, at age 4, probably innocently, went over and was playing with the bones and seemed fascinated with these bones.
That absolutely astounds me. Excuse me for interrupting you, but I never heard anything like that ever happened.
You see, you're doing a television show prompted by a book which was written, which apparently is one parent's story which doesn't jive with the other parent's story at all.
Which is why we're here.
Right.
Which is exactly why we're here.
That
kind of an anecdote.
Like
Now,
as far as I know, that never happened. That sounds like the shows that people go on and talk about children mistreating animals, and can you predict who's going to do something terrible somewhere down the line in his life Jeff's condition was proven to not have anything to do with his upbringing. I don't want parents frightened to death thinking that the little things they do or the little things they miss are going to result in them having a child that is going to cause all of this pain and anguish. That isn't the way it happened. In my mind, you cannot tell how certain actions or reactions are going to be computed in a child's mind. So the first thing I thought about was he emotionally, did he come out of this life with us emotionally disturbed in some way? He didn't. I've asked him.
Some people would say that someone who had committed such horrible crimes must have had something horrible happen to them. You're saying just didn't happen.
You know, I wish I had an answer. It's a terrible feeling to have this unending, unknown, why did this happen? What's the purpose of this happening? The horribleness that so many people have had to go through. I wish I could come up with an answer. That would be useful. It isn't useful to speculate on what small, tiny little things did we spank our child, and that turned him into a, as they called me, a monster maker. Jeff was raised with all the love and care and concern that any child could be raised with, and what happened to him, I don't know. I wish I knew. I'd give anything to know.
When you ask yourself that question, Joyce, I mean, you know, when you're alone with yourself and you wonder why it happened, what answers do you come up with? What questions do you have about the origins of his madness, if you will?
I can't explain it. I can only cry about it. I asked the universe, why would this be allowed to happen? I don't have an answer for that. I'd like one.
Coming up, could Jeffrey Dahmer have been caught years before his arrest?
I didn't know what would happen. I thought, you know, it's all going to come crashing down now.
There were times during the years Jeffrey Dahmer was killing young men and boys when he came close to being caught, stopped from taking more lives. One of those crucial moments still haunted Dahmer's father, Lionel, during my 1994 interview with him. In March of 1989, you were helping him gather up his belongings, going through his room, and you came across a box. Tell me about that incident.
It was about a 1-foot square box, metal and wood box, that I thought contained pornographic material.
And you asked Jeff to open it?
Yeah, because my mother, you know, I didn't want her to come into contact with any of that stuff. And asked him to open it up, and he refused. He said, I'd rather not. And I said, Jeff, open it up. I just want to see what's in there. And he said, can't I have any privacy in the house at all? Just this 1 square foot of privacy. And I said, Jeff, open it up, or I'm going to just take it down into the basement and get a screwdriver or something and open it up. I'll just open it up. And he got angry, very visibly agitated, and said, if I can't have 1 square foot of privacy, then I'm just going to leave. So he walked out of the house, and then I took the box. I took it from him. I mean, he gave it up. He walked out of the house. I'm surprised that he gave it up. But I started walking down the basement, and then he came in the back door just as I was going down the basement steps, and he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I lost my temper. There's just some pornographic stuff in there." He said, "Just wait. I'll open it up tomorrow morning and show you what it is. Just let me put it away now and forget about it. Let's not cause an uproar anymore today or tonight, and because of Grandma." And so, my not fathoming what could be in that box, I said, "Okay, we'll just open it up tomorrow then, and then let's get rid of it, whatever it is." And the next morning he came down from upstairs and showed me, and there was pornographic literature in there. And I said, "Okay, get rid of it now, and I don't want to, see any more of it around here." He said, "Okay, Dad." And that was the end of that incident, and I didn't realize what was in that box.
What was in the box?
Well, as I learned later, after the trial, it was one of the human heads, one of the victims, which he then took to his work and put in the locker. I told Jeff I can't imagine what I would do if I would have opened that box and found that, because I probably would have reacted in my typical fashion of just shock and numbness. I probably would have thought that, maybe it's an artificial, some type of, I don't know, an occult thing or just some decorative thing, that something, but not human. I can imagine I would finally realize, or suspicion, what that is. And then I don't know what would happen. I think I probably would have lost it. I don't know what I would have done. I asked Jeff, what would he have done if I would have opened that up and found out what that was. And all he said was, well, that would have been the end of the line. The jig would have been up.
One of the chilling stories that your dad tells is about the box he had found. Can you give me your perspective on that?
I had a box in my bedroom closet, and it contained the mummified head and genitals of a young man I met in one of the bars down in Milwaukee. And it was a locked metal box. My dad one week came to visit and happened to see it, and we got into a bit of an argument because I wouldn't open it up. He took the locked box down to the basement and was about to smash it open.
What were you thinking as he was making his way downstairs to open the box?
Well, I was outside, and I was thinking, I've got to stop this from happening. I didn't know what I'd do or say. I didn't know what would happen. I thought, it's all going to come crashing down now. And but the box was never opened, not in my dad's presence. And so the lies continued. The whole scenario just continued for years after that.
Were there times when your dad may have been closer to discovering what was going on than even he knew? Times where you got worried that maybe he would find something out?
The box incident was about as close as it came, That was just one incident. There were others. But that was a particularly nerve-wracking one.
Are there others you can share? Other close calls?
When acidified, dissolved human remains were found, they didn't look like human remains anymore, but they were in the trash bin outside in the garage. That was one incident. And a few others I'd rather not go into right now.
Were you relieved to be arrested?
Part of me was, and part of me wasn't.
Explain.
I don't know. It's like I don't believe I have a split personality, but you know the feeling where you're sort of glad about something, but on the other hand you're not. That's how it was. It was a relief not to have to keep such a gigantic secret that I had kept for so many years. And once I saw that I had no choice but to face it, I decided to face it head on and make a full confession. So I am glad that the secrets are gone.
Coming up, a father's anguish as he confronts the gruesome reality of his son's crimes.
What was it like the first time you saw Jeff after he was arrested for murder? How good was Jeff at manipulating you?
Excellent. He's very good.
Good liar?
He fooled everyone. He fooled me. Yeah, very good. He fooled his probation officer, his attorney, the police, you know, who came. I mean, he had bodies in his next room when the police were standing in his outer room. There were so many people that he fooled.
And he could lie and be
just
cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, he just looked very innocuous. He just looked like an average person who couldn't possibly do the things that he did.
What was it like the first time you saw Jeff after he was arrested for murder?
Oh, that was really tough. He was disheveled, you know, beard, and he hadn't slept. There were people screaming in the cells, and he just stood there like a limp rag.
What did you say to each other?
I went up to him and I said, "Jeff, I love you." I hugged him. I cried. He didn't seem to be emotionally moved. He just seemed like he was just wrung out.
Did he hug you back?
Yeah, as well as he could. He was shackled in front of him, so he really couldn't hug. But he pressed, you know, forward. But it just seemed like he was just his soul had dropped out of him.
What were his first words to you when he saw you?
I'm just so sorry. I really screwed up. It was pretty much unemotional, emotionless response. He just said those words, and he looked extremely depressed and sad.
Do you remember the feelings that went through you at that point?
Yeah, I felt really those same feelings: depression, you know, extremely well, shame and just what a waste. The other feelings were that I wanted to still help him in some way, and I kept telling him, reassuring that his attorney said that he would get help. And I told Jeff that you really do need help, Jeff, mental help, and we're going to try to get you into this place to get the proper help.
How did you feel when you first heard about the crimes, about the nature of the crimes he'd committed?
I think it was sort of a feeling as if I were just floating above myself and observing some other person. As if I were anesthetized with something that just prevented me from feeling anything deeply. It was just a total stun, a total shock.
You went numb.
Complete numbness.
And in the moment when the pain has come through, what is it that you felt?
I felt all these different emotions come over me. How am I going to face victims, families, if I go to the trial? How can I arrange something? My feelings were for Jeff too. I sort of put myself in his place. He's totally lost. I could almost feel the total disorientation and loss, feeling like maybe he would want to commit suicide. I felt very depressed and shamed. Just very, very depressed, just to the bottom of the pit.
Have you ever stopped loving your son?
No. No. I think that part of my continuing to want to love and support him is because I can remember him as a youth when he was innocent.
What do you see when you look at Jeff's face?
I guess the naive parent in me still says I see an innocent, shy child, a defenseless, vulnerable child who I wish I could help now. I know there are some people who say he shouldn't have any peace. The victims' families don't have any peace. But I want to see what I can do to help Jeff have some peace in his mind, because there's still things there.
Does he deserve that?
And well, yeah, I think he does.
Was there a time when you hated Jeff for what he did?
Yeah, I think probably there was a mixture of feelings of anger and hate and disappointment and also feeling extremely sorry for what he did. Felt very sorry for victims and their families, and also for Jeff, the terrible waste.
Have you had a chance to sit down with Jeff and ask him why? Why did you do this? What was it?
I asked him once, and he doesn't know. I asked him, he does not know. And it seems like a stunted, short answer. That, it seems like there should be more of an answer than that, but he says he really doesn't know.
Coming up.
I tell you, Dad, I'm really sorry that this has happened, and I love you a lot.
I love you too.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
The conclusion to Confessions of a Serial Killer when we come back.
Your father told me that one of the reasons he wrote this book was in order to put down on paper what he has been unable to say to you in words, kind of reaching out to you. What do you want to say to him, having read this?
I tell you, Dad, I'm really sorry that this has happened, and I love you a lot.
I love you too.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
We haven't always shown it a lot, but I do love him a great deal.
I love you.
And without the support of my folks, I don't think I would have come through this. We've opened up with each other a lot more now since the trial and everything. There's no secrets to be hidden away. I don't feel that I have to keep any secrets from him. We've come to face what's real now, instead of just glossing things over and talking about superficial things. So there's a lot more communication between us.
This book may serve as a further bridge between Jeff and myself. And just for that purpose, I regard it as valuable for me.
Do you feel closer to your dad having read this?
I feel closer in that I understand more how he was thinking, what his thoughts were, what some of his motivations were. I'm glad he wrote it.
Anything not in the book you want to say to him?
I can't think too clearly right now. I'm feeling pretty emotional. I think that a lot of things have been brought out in this interview that has brought us to a little bit deeper, just a little bit closer understanding as to how this all originated. And, well, whenever I get emotional, my analytical side gets clouded, and I can't express myself quite as well as I would like.
Can you talk about the feelings you have? You feeling close to Jeff?
I feel very close to Jeff, and it's going to continue till our death. And I feel good about it.
Do you think you'll ever have the answers you've been looking for about why, what happened, and what role, if any, you played?
Maybe not. My primary question is the origins of it. And if something can be learned about that, it may help other people avert problems.
Is it still there, Jeff? Does it ever go away?
In part, no, it never completely goes away. I'll probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings. It's not nearly so bad now that there's no avenues to actually act on it. But no, it never seems to go completely away.
So the thoughts still come to you?
Sometimes, yeah.
Are you different, Jeff, in terms of how you think back on all of this?
I would hope I'm different. I'm glad that I'm in a position now where I don't feel the compulsion to do these things. I'm glad that it's over. Any words I say to the victims' families are just going to seem trite and empty. I don't know how to express the regret, the sorrow, that I feel for what I've done for their sons. I can't find the right words. All right, see you later, Dale.
After the interview at the prison, Dahmer casually showed us something a little unsettling.
Just a point of interest, that's the type of box.
This is the type of box?
He wanted us to know that box looked strikingly like the one his father had found, the one Jeffrey had used to hide body parts.
Thank you, Jeff. All right.
To this day, the interview with Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the eeriest experiences of my 30 years in television news. From the weak handshake with which he greeted me to his bizarre observation about that metal box as he returned to his cell, Dahmer was a haunting figure. He often said he had wanted the death penalty. 9 months after our interview, his death wish came true. I'm Stone Phillips.